The diplomatic dispute between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy regarding Ukraine's exclusion from negotiations with Russia over the fate of Ukraine has upended international protocols and rattled U.S. allies in Europe. The Economist magazine captures it this way. An illustration of Trump and Putin together with the cover for its European edition, titled Europe's Worst Nightmare. For the interview tonight, we turn to Council on Foreign Relations Senior Fellow Charles Kupchan. Charles, it's good to be with you again. If it's possible to give an assessment of a continent's worldview, what is Europe thinking right now?
The word that comes to my mind is meltdown. The last 10 days have been basically completely disorienting. I was at the Munich Security Conference this past weekend. J.D. Vance, the vice president, gives a speech in which he more or less endorses the far-right Alternative for Germany party that has links to neo-Nazis. He then launches what I think is probably a needed effort to open a channel of communication to Putin and have Rubio, the Secretary of State, meet with Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. But there's no apparent strategy here. There's no game plan. And then, as you put it, John, over the last couple of days, Trump has been launching one insult after another at Zelenskyy at a time when he needs to fashion a working relationship with him and strengthen Zelensky's leverage when it comes to negotiations with Russia.
Charles, if President Trump is getting ready to cut a deal with Putin, what would that look like? What would be the worst case scenario, I guess, for Ukraine?
Well, we don't actually know what Trump has in mind because there is no game plan. Nobody has actually articulated what it is that Trump is aiming for. I think there are two different outcomes. One is acceptable and one is not. The acceptable outcome is that the 80% of Ukraine that is still controlled by Ukrainians emerges as a free, sovereign, independent country that is charting a course into the European Union and the West. Trump may not hold the line. Yeah. He may be willing to throw Ukraine under the bus, to let Putin have his way, which is to pull Ukraine back into Russia's sphere of influence. He won't have the Ukrainians on board for that. He won't have the Europeans on board for that. He may have Putin on board for that. Let's see how this plays out.
Charles, what could the Europeans do to regain leverage or push back against President Trump? Do they have any cards they can play?
They do. And I think that Trump does not want to go down in history as the president who lost Ukraine. And as a consequence, it's in his political interest to forge a deal that gets buy-in from the Ukrainians and gets buy-in from European allies. They're not going to sign off on a deal that leaves Ukraine a ward of Russia. So if Trump really wants a win here, and I think he does, an end to the war that leaves Ukraine standing, he's going to have to do homework now with the Ukrainians, with the Europeans, to forge a consensus on what that deal looks like.
I have about 20 seconds left. The National Security Advisor said Zelenskyy, quote, needs to take a good hard look and sign that deal about billions in mineral rights for the United States. What's your quick reaction to that?
Ukraine is trying to stay afloat. Ukraine is going to need billions of dollars in reconstruction assistance. The last thing we need to do now is tell them that we'll support them only if we're going to start draining their coffers. Makes no sense.